Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I didn't know what to say, so I got the Woman's Quran, and all wisdom is in here. And so I thought I'd read from it. Actually, before I begin, let me just do a test. Okay, yeah, good, okay. 50% of the time when you have a name tag at a conference, it's invisible because as a physicist, I can tell you that the cardboard is opaque. So it's very simple. You just have to write on both sides. And I wish I'd told people that earlier, and then you can actually, people know who you are. I want to begin with a confession. I am not an ex-Muslim. Yeah, I know. But I did have a Jewish mother, so I know about guilt. But to be a little more serious, I want to take time to thank Miriam for inviting me, and I really mean this. I've been touched. Many of you have come up to me during the meeting and told me about impacts that I may have had on you, but which means more to me than you know. People are often apologetic for coming up, and it really means a tremendous amount. I can't tell you how much, but more than that, I can't tell you how much I admire all of you. I first encountered the ex-Muslims years ago when Richard and I were filming, I think, The Unbelievers, and we were invited to London, and then realized that we couldn't film there for a very good reason. And that, you know, we're often, sometimes people call us brave for speaking out, and we're not brave. Right? There are death threats every now and then, but you're brave, and I just can't tell you how much I have been in awe of everything I've heard in this meeting. I admire all of you. I really mean that to the bottom of my heart. So I just wanted to start with that. You people are brave and risk your lives to do something important, and I'm humbled and honored to be here. I really mean it. It's the first one I've come to, and it's just been a revelation, if you excuse the expression. I thought I'd begin with I'm going to try and make a few remarks, and then there'll be more time in the panel. But I thought when talking about science and dogma, I'd read from actually my favorite science writer, who's a guy named Jacob Bronowski, a British scientist, and he did The Ascent of Man, and it's a wonderful series. But he wrote this: dream or nightmare, we have to live our experience as it is, and we have to live it awake. We live in a world which is penetrated through and through by science, and which is both whole and real. We cannot turn it into a game simply by taking sides. And for me, that's a mantra, if you want. Dogma, in some sense, is taking sides. So how does science fight dogma? And it's really quite simple. My last book began saying the three most important words in science are, I don't know. And those are profoundly important. Just simply saying I don't know defeats dogma right there. Dogma, people in religion and other kinds of dogma know the answers to questions even before they're asked. They have a truth that is unvarying, which immediately should make you suspect. But that leads to the other part, which is questioning. Science evolves by questioning, but everything does. And the biggest way you can fight dogma is to ask questions and continue to ask questions and never stop asking questions, because nothing is sacred. Absolutely nothing is sacred. No idea. And I'll come back to that because it goes well beyond religion. We teach the wrong way. When I was growing up, we taught facts, and there are more facts and misfacts in my iPhone than I'll ever know. We need to teach how to think. And we do that by asking questions. And too many teachers and parents and politicians are afraid to both say, I don't know the answer, and to realize that the way to do it is to ask questions, and to realize that for every young person, the first time they understand something is for them the first time in the history of the world it's been understood. It's not just a matter of regurgitating what's already been known. For them, it's understanding and internalizing things for the first time. And the only way to do it is continuing to ask questions. The characteristic when you're trying to understand if there's dogma, and Dan gave an important variety of versions of thinking about it, but you can tell when it's dogma because no questions are allowed. And that immediately means there's no knowledge being produced. Of course, we all recognize that with religion. I've heard the stories of people who are not allowed to ask questions and how their lives have been risked and sometimes lives lost. I do want to add to that something I brought up yesterday, which is that at least where I come from, it's not just religious dogma that one needs to fight. It's increasingly secular dogma. Laurie brought up the fact that it's nice to hear that more people are not, in the US, say, are not religious. But that doesn't help a lot if those people who are not religious believe in a secular dogma, believe that you can't ask questions, that you should be removed for asking questions, that simply saying, say, sex is binary, gender may not be, but sex is binary, it's a fact of biology, will get you removed from universities nowadays in many places. And lots of examples. Or simply questioning whether indigenous myth is the same as science. Again, I know people who've been removed from tenured positions, and in the government of New Zealand tried to basically make it a law against basically saying that indigenous science wasn't the same as science. And the idea that questioning will lead to offense, which of course we've heard about over and over again in the religious world, is unfortunately permeating into the secular world, that somehow being offended gives you special rights. As my friend Stephen Fry has often said, being offended does not give you special rights. And in particular, I've often said, and I've been pleased to see it on mugs now as memes after I've said it, that the purpose of education is to make us uncomfortable. If you're not uncomfortable, you're not learning. You're not being pushed beyond your comfort zone. And the other thing that science works so well against is identity politics. Science is the most universalist enterprise that humans have. Science can be done by anyone, and is done by anyone, and has been done by anyone. Science deals with commonalities, the commonalities of being human. It's independent of sex, race, religion, everything else, no matter what some people say. The best example I can think of is look at a picture sometime of the 5,000 people on a given particle experiment at CERN, the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, and look at the diversity and variety of people there, all of whom may come from 100 different countries, speaking 30 different languages, different religions, but they're all working together and they're building an instrument that works because science works, and that's what makes it important. It is, in fact, while I spend much of my life trying to argue that science is part of our culture, that's the same as music, art, literature, that the important part of science is not the technology that science produces, which has enhanced all of our lives, not just that. It is the fact that it changes our perspective of our place in the cosmos, like art, like music, like literature. It's a cultural activity, but it does differ from those. It is the only cultural activity I know that is independent of culture. Music, art, literature are done by different cultures and are particularly appreciated by people from those different cultures, but science is independent of that and is universally appreciated or underappreciated. The next thing I want to say is that the only way to search for truth, the only way is the scientific process. There is no other way. No knowledge comes from revelation. Never has, never will. Wisdom might come from reflection, but no knowledge comes from pure thought. In fact, it's the easiest way to delude yourself. And we all delude ourselves, and we're the easiest people to delude. The thing that science teaches us is to question yourself as much as anyone else. Now, I think the last thing I'm going to say has to do with questioning. It came from this meeting. Mohsen, are you here? There you are in the back. Mohsen was one of the kind people who told me that I'd change your lives in some ways, and it almost brings me to tears to talk about it. But it involved something that I think illustrates the importance of questioning. A bunch of years ago, I did a debate in London with a guy named Hamza Sorfes and on Islam versus atheism, which I at the time, well, I don't know whether I regretted it, but I did it. It was not easy, and there was a lot of hate, but that's a different, and there were a number of things that happened I won't go into. I tried to provoke, and I thought at once I'd get a fatwa, but I didn't, sorry. Hamza said that Islam was a religion of questioning, free questioning, open questioning, and any question was allowed. So I looked and I said, well, can you ask the question whether Muhammad was a pedophile? Is that an okay question? But that's not what Mohsen said. I talked about the fact that the difference between science and dogma is that dogma never changes, and science changes because we learn things. And the example I gave, which I regretted a lot afterwards, because if you read, every day I get email hate stuff from Islamic fundamentalists because they claim I promote incest. And at the time, I used an example that I first got from Steven Pinker, which is the question of incest. So incest clearly had a rational reason for having societal taboos. You don't want to have children because of the genetic problems. But brought up the question, let's say in the modern world where we have birth control, a brother and sister love each other, decide to have birth control and decide to have sex. Can I say that that is fundamentally wrong? And the answer is I can't. I can't say it. I may not personally approve of it, but I see no objective reason to say that there's some universal truth given by God that it's wrong. And of course, that was the reason I've come to promote, said I promote atheism, or promote incest, which I don't. But Mozan said to me something which was important, is that when I talked about that, he used to hear that I was promoting incest. And then he asked himself the question and realized he couldn't answer it either. And you said to me, that changed everything for you. That was the beginning of the road to questioning. And I realized that therefore asking questions, even questions that are uncomfortable questions, maybe especially questions that are uncomfortable questions, can have an impact. And while I've regretted in some ways doing that because of all the pushback, I now will never regret it for the rest of my life because it changed your life in a positive way. And that's what we have to do. So I think that's all I'm going to say.